Hey guys, so I'm back with another Emini S&P 500 trading recap after taking off kind of last week from doing some of the videos, but we'll definitely be putting together some for the rest of this week. Overall, solid result. Just a couple hours traded here, and kind of was just going in line with the live training classes I was doing with some of the students, same times for today, and 6.75 points of profit. We saw number of really good results because it was a pretty straightforward day, probably even a little bit on the easy side of things, but nothing wrong with that. We had actually seen a pretty good run up in some of the pre-market action, and overall we're, these extremely high levels, 2145 is where we pushed up to here before we eventually pushed up even higher later on. And so really all I wanted to do was go long as we were kind of starting things, ideally because it is such a bullish market. There is so much buyer control there that it is kind of that path of least resistance. Now, that doesn't mean that a short opportunity can't come in if there's something really compelling, if there's something really high momentum. But you have to be kind of cautious because even if you're getting some good momentum to the downside, any of these areas that have reacted before, anything that's acted as some resistance, acted as some support, it can bring in buyers again. Any of those levels can bring in buyers again. So it's definitely being really kind of extra cautious here. But as mentioned, as the market opened up here at 9:30, I was being a little bit aggressive, traded right at that open, which is always a little bit risky. So we didn't have everybody trading in there, but anybody who didn't trade there pretty much latched onto this second one here and took that up. So I just kind of ran things through. A perfect world, maybe I would have taken the profit here, got back in and taken a little bit more, but I didn't quite reach my initial target here, so I was just happy with that, and no real worries on only catching basically the one chunk of it. But then just getting back in because we're still looking pretty good. We're still pushing into nice fresh highs. We still have some pretty good momentum. But you can notice here that on this next one, things start to change in terms of that price behavior. Here, we've got things pushing into those nice clear higher highs, get those higher lows, and you're getting these good momentum pushes. And these bars kind of stacking up on each other. And then as things go along, start to see a lot more chop and a lot more limited momentum, choppy behavior. So adjusted things a little bit in terms of bringing in that target from originally 2 points, just bringing it a little bit less. Would have been happy even taking 1.5. But as you can see here, it continues to consolidate, continues to tighten to the point that there's really going to be, depending on what sort of oscillator you might use, if you use a stochastics or an RSI or what have you, you're probably going to have some pretty heavy divergence here, but not necessarily enough that you're going to get a full-blown reversal. But with this limited momentum, often going to come a little bit deeper and try and test into some of these lower areas, kind of search for buyers again. And that's not uncommon when you have these strong trends going on, that when the market opens, it tries to continue it, and then price often does come back, as kind of the professionals are looking for those more discounted areas where they can buy at a better price. Essentially, they're still looking to move things up, but they want to find better prices to do it. So we often come back into those areas, and we had a really good drop here. Wasn't really able to latch onto that one, unfortunately. And then we got kind of stuck in some of these areas here where momentum wasn't necessarily strong enough for me to go short because of the reasons I mentioned before, how I really didn't want to get super aggressive to the downside in what was a pretty bullish market overall. So I was all right with kind of waiting this stuff out, playing it safe. We did have some people who traded in here, some more advanced veteran traders that I work with, but most just kind of let this thing slide. This was the only real safe one in here, and that was one that I unfortunately missed at the time, focusing on some question and answer stuff. But then we got in the area here, pretty obvious area for reversal and pretty clear from the price action as well. That's a likely scenario. And then all we had to do is just wait for that structural break again, putting some buyers in control and then taking things long. And the two areas for taking profit in here, typically I aim for a couple points most of the time in these sort of swings, but a couple points can be difficult in here because of this little area. So when you get this sort of rounded top like this, you get kind of the bottom of the cup. These areas often react, and so you either have the option taking profit just before it or trying to hold for the breakthrough. And so either of those are valid. Getting that 2 points is actually one of the more difficult profits to get. So I decided to wait for the break and try and run this thing up into those prior highs. Turns out I could have run it up quite a bit further, and there's actually a really good trade over here as well. But I was pretty happy with that. Considered that to be a pretty good outcome for the day. And it's 6.75 points of profit. it's a nice profit per contract, 337.50. So depending on how many contracts you're trading, you can do quite well on a day like that. And overall, things weren't moving that aggressively, so I was just fine with kind of taking that profit, banking it, and calling it a day there. So hopefully you guys had a pretty solid day as well. And if we can get these sort of swings and this sort of price action to continue here as the week goes on, it should be a pretty good one.